Welcome to the tip channel. That is perfection. Hello and welcome back to the tip channel. Today we're going to take a look at what it takes to change out a bathroom faucet. So first of all, naturally you're going to need a faucet. And the things that you want to look at is, do you have a 4-inch spread or do you have an 8-inch spread? And what I'm talking about is this, is that from handle to handle. Now in our case, we have an 8-inch spread. That means from center of handle to center of handle is 8 inches. You also find a 4-inch center, and the handles will be a lot closer, almost right on top of the neck. So identify which faucet that you have and then naturally pick your faucet up. Now, this is important. What I tell people, whenever it comes to a faucet, stay with the name brand. Go with like Moen or Kohler or something like that, so that in the future, if you have an issue, that's not going to be a problem in finding repair parts for that faucet. In our case today, we're going to put in a Kohler faucet. And what you're going to find underneath of your sink is two possible scenarios in regards to the water hookup. And what I'm talking about is that you will probably find a chrome shutoff valve. And the chrome shutoff valve is either going to be a quarter turn, meaning that you only turn it from like 12 to 3 in order to shut it off, or you may have to spin it 3 or 4 times in order to shut it off. So one of the two case scenarios. And always remember, rightly tightly, leftly loosey. So you want to go clockwise, shutting that valve off. Now, if your valve doesn't hold, I do have a video on how to repair these chrome valves. Or naturally you can go to the main shutoff valve and shut down the entire house while you're making this repair. But you probably will find a chrome shutoff valve in one of two case scenarios. One's going to be that the faucet itself is made with a plastic supply line. And a lot of the newer faucets nowadays have that case scenario. So it'll come right down and it will hook up right into the 3/8 supply line valve. The other case scenario is that you may have what is referred to as a faucet supply line. Now, faucet supply line, this end is 3/8, so it's going to screw right onto your chrome valve. The other end of that is going to be 1/2 inch. So when you go to buy these, make sure you get the 3/8 to 1/2. You don't want to go 1/2 to 1/2. Okay, so this end of it's going to go on the faucet. In our case, we're going to put this Kohler in, and it has that hookup, meaning that we're an 8-inch spread, and the faucet supply line is going to screw right onto this faucet. Now, if you have this case scenario with the supply lines, change the supply lines, because this does have a little rubber seat here and here, and they will wear out over time. Now, that's the normal case scenario. And in our case, I built my home 35 years ago, so underneath of my vanity is what I would refer to as a worst case scenario. Now, the worst case scenario I'm going to push towards the end of the video and show you that portion of it, but we're going to pretend like this is just a typical installation and follow through on what it will take to change this faucet out. Now, the one thing that I want to strive is I do a lot of kitchens and done a lot of installations over the year. And I would go in and I would ask the lady, where's your shutoff valve at for your home, your main shutoff valve? And she would look at me and say, oh, it's down in the basement somewhere, Dawn. You need to know where that valve is at. If you have an emergency, you got to go to that main and shut the main down. You don't have to look for anything else if you know where that main shutoff valve is. Can't strive that enough. Okay, so here we are underneath of the sink. Now, if you had the typical supply line, it would have came up and connected right here. So you would have disconnected this part here, but this part here is going to be in our video later, which is our worst case scenario. Anyways, some of the things that we need to do here is, first of all, last night what I did was I shot some Kroll around these areas here, and that's a creeper deeper, that's going to creep into those threads and make that a little easier to get that nut out of there. So we have 3 of those we need to contend with. Now, this style of faucet, you can see, used a rubber line going from the control over to the center faucet area. So we're not going to use this faucet. I'm just going to take a pair of diagonals and just simply cut this right out of the way. So we'll do that. That'll get those out of the way so we can get up to those nuts to release that. Now, this is the old style of stopper, if you will, and we'll need to disconnect that to get that out of our way as well. At this point, we've got everything cut out of our way. So now we're ready to tackle those 3 nuts up there to get the faucet off. Now, if the curl did its job and creeped into there overnight, it'll be pretty easy for us to actually get those nuts off. But you can use a pair of channel locks in order to get those nuts off, but it's very awkward up in there. Keep in mind, it's a tight space. You're trying to get on the nuts. Very difficult. This is what's referred to as a faucet wrench. Now, this particular one is expandable, so if I need to go up a little higher, I can, or I can use it in the short version. Now, the way this jaw works is that in one position, it's going to remove the nut. You flip it over to this side, and it'll tighten the nut. So, what we're looking at is rightly tightly, leftly loosely. So, we want to go in a counterclockwise motion in order to remove the nuts up there. So we can pretend like this is a nut, and if we go in this direction, you can see that what's going to happen is that it's going to tighten as we crimp down on the nut. So position it correctly, go ahead and stick it up on, and now we'll take those 3 nuts off. Okay, so this is what the faucet wrench looks like when we are on the nut. Now, this jaw is going to tighten as I rotate this nut. The curl worked its magic overnight, so I was able to spin the nuts off fairly easily. But worst case scenario, what if you're having a difficult time getting these things loose? Well, there's a few things that you can do. If you have the 8-inch spread like I have, sometimes you can go up on top and grab a hold of the knob with a pair of channel locks and twist it. Sometimes just breaking it loose, just that quarter of a turn, will make it easy to get that nut off. The second thing that you can also do is to take your faucet wrench and get an extension and a deep well socket. So there we are, and you add that to the handle on the faucet wrench. Now you're tripling the amount of force that you're applying up there. What if that doesn't work? Well, I sometimes believe that I actually wrote Murphy's Law. I always get caught in the worst case scenarios. So let's just say you had a nut that was difficult to get off no matter what you did. What do? Well, take your multi-tool, get a bimetal blade and put in it, and you're going to need probably several blades to pull this off. This nut is up there, go up in there and cut on each side of the nut. Now what you want to do is cut like in the middle here and in the middle here. Then you can probably take a screwdriver, just tap it once, it'll probably just pop right off. So that's a worst case scenario. If you do have to do that, remember, put a pair of goggles on. You're up underneath of there, you're going to have filings coming down, protect your eyes. Okay, so we are at the point where we're ready to set our faucet. Now, the first thing is read and thoroughly understand the directions. Yeah, right. What? I look at them if something doesn't work. Anyway, in regards to your faucets, if you are using the faucet like I'm going to with the 8-inch spread, what you need to know is what side is hot and what side is cold. Now, some of them, the ends of them will be marked blue or red. In our case, what we have is Kohler's put a label on here, and I actually like this because this label also has the model number of the faucet. So if I ever need any parts, I can look right up underneath there, see what the model number is, and order the correct parts. Anyways, this is marked cold, so we know that that is our cold side. Now, what you want to do is, naturally your cold's going to be going this direction, your hot's going to go that direction. So we'd be looking at it going in this direction. That's our off position, and that's how we're going to set this. So we'll go ahead and put this down through. I'll have someone hold it up on top, and then I'll naturally screw the nut up on the bottom of this one. Likewise with the hot, and then we'll do the center. Once we get those into place, I'll take you back under the sink, and we'll show you the hookup of these lines into the center portion of the faucet. Now, if you remember, the nuts that we removed from this sink was just like this, and we used the socket wrench on that. A lot of manufacturers are changing that up a little bit. Now, first of all, faucets nowadays are made with the rubber seal up on top of the faucet. In the old days, we had to use plumber's putty up there, but you don't need to do that. Underneath of it is a sort of second seal, if you will. This will go up. Then there is a metal washer. Then next is this piece. See what the difference is? This has two little screws on. So you'll spin this up and get it snug, and then you'll take a Phillips screwdriver and tighten up these two screws. A lot of manufacturers are changing to this, and here's the reason being. Whenever you're on a china bowl or something like this, if you apply too much pressure, naturally you can take and crack the china. So you don't want to do that. So they're switching to this, which is a little more forgiving. You can't get quite as much pressure with a Phillips screwdriver that you can with a wrench. So saves a lot of hassles. So we'll go ahead and get these spun up, and we'll take a look at things. All right, so here we are underneath, and you can see I've spun the nut up on, and then I've tightened up those Phillips screws. Rubber washer and metal washer is before the nut that we spin on. The center portion has a sort of C bracket, if you will, that goes up, and then this nut spins on. Now, the hookup of the faucet itself is pretty simplistic. What you have is you have a line coming down from the faucet, and this T-piece will simply snap right up onto it. So the plastic Y-piece, T-piece, whatever you want to refer to it as, snapped onto the faucet, and then the two supply lines coming out of the levers are snapping into this T/Y as well. So a pretty simplistic setup there. Now we're ready to hook up our supply lines. Now, if you forget which line is what coming out of the floor, if the building was plumbed correctly, the cold will be on the right and hot will be on the left. So we'll go ahead and get our supply lines hooked up. The next step that we need to do is to put the drain in the sink. Now, if you paid attention whenever we were tearing this apart, we had the old rod style that you used to have to pull up in order to work the stopper. They were a nightmare. They were always going out of adjustment and what have you, just a real pain. Most manufacturers are now switching to this, which does not need that rod anymore. I'm going to refer to it as a toe tapper. Now here's the reason being, I was first introduced to this on a tub. So you take your toe and you would push down on it, and naturally that would seal it. Whenever you were finished with the bath, you hit it again with your toe and it would release the bath water. But now they're doing it in sinks as well, so that is a nice feature. Now, in the old days, we used to take and put a plumber's putty around here. You'll notice that there's already a rubber gasket there. So that gasket, what it does is that it holds the water in the sink bowl. So let's just say, for instance, you're washing your face and what have you, that's going to stop it there. But then there's also a gasket at the bottom, and the gasket at the bottom is the main thing as far as sealing the sink. Now, you'll notice that it has this hole right here. That hole is because the sinks have an overflow. In other words, if you have a child in here and he hits the stopper, turns the faucet on, walks away, instead of this thing overflowing onto the floor, it goes into this hole and it'll come down into this trap. So this is your primary seal. So we're back under the sink, and I knew that sooner or later Murphy's Law would catch up with me. Now, the nut that was holding the piece to the sink came down easy. I had soaked it down with some Kroll. Problem is that this piece screws down into this piece, and it won't come out. I've applied as much pressure with channel locks as I can. I don't want to get pipe wrenches in here because I don't want to put too much pressure against the china. So what's my alternative? Well, my alternative is going to be goggles, number one, and a hand grinder. Now you can also do this with a multi-tool if you don't have the grinder. With a metal blade in, it would take a little bit longer. But we're just going to go ahead and cut that out of there and make our job and life a lot easier. So at this point, we have everything hooked up. Now, in regards to the trap, if you have a chrome trap, you probably want to go ahead and change that out. If you've got a plastic trap, you probably want to at least change out the washers. Now, on a bathroom vanity, you may have a couple different scenarios in regards to the trap. You may have an 1.25" trap, and if you're going to change the washers, naturally you'll need 1.25" washers. Or a lot of people like myself like to use an 1.5" trap. An 1.5" trap is like for a kitchen, so it's a little bigger diameter. So if you were to use that or have that scenario, you need this type of washer. And what that does is that reduces the 1.25" down to 1.5" on your trap. So that'll take care of that situation there. Okay, so at this point, everything's hooked up. We're ready to turn the water on. But this is the most important part. You're probably wondering at this point what this is in the instructions. And you can tell your wife it's just an extra part and she'll probably believe you. But keeping in mind, when you're down there working on those old pipes and what have you, you're knocking a lot of crud loose. So what this part actually is that is to remove the screen. So this will go right up in here, it'll click into the screen, and we'll unscrew that. What I want to do is take this screen out. I'm going to run some water through here first to get out any crud from the lines, and then I'll pop the screen back in. Now, if you got ahead of yourself and you went ahead and tested your lines, you can actually still go ahead and take the screen out and clean it. At this point, we've finished with the video, and those of you that are not sticking around for the worst case scenario, I want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and please like and subscribe, and have a great day. Today we're going to take care of the worst case scenario underneath of the bathroom vanity cabinet. Now, in preparation for this, what I've done first of all is I shut off my main. Now I have a floor above this, so I went to a sink up there and I turned the faucet on. What you want is you want to allow air into the system, because if not, what will happen is all of that water in the floor above will continuously come down to this area, so we'll have a nightmare on our hands. So open up the faucet above you. Now, go to a sink that is lower than this and turn on a faucet there. That's going to let all the water in the system back drain to that bottom location. We'll also want to turn this faucet on, and we'll notice that we'll hear some air like sucking into the faucet, knowing that everything is back draining down. Now, as a precautionary, what I did also was to shut my power off to my tankless heaters. Now, I'm sure there's probably some type of safety device that if there's no water coming into it, it'll automatically shut off. But I'm not going to take a chance. So we went ahead and shut the breakers off on those just to be safe. And I'm going to start with a MAP gas and heat that piece of solder off. I prefer the MAP gas. You can use just propane if you want. The MAP gas is just going to get a little hotter a lot quicker. And if there's any little bit of moisture in there, a lot of times the MAP gas will get it hot enough where you can get that solder off and not have an issue. Not sure if you could hear that, but that is the air allowing all that water to go down. Okay, so here we are underneath of the sink looking at the worst case scenario. Now, I grew up in a coke oven patch town and had galvanized plumbing with absolutely no pressure. So I always swore that if I was going to build a home, it was going to have 3/4 coppers. That's what we have, 3/4 copper coming out of the floor and then a 3/4 inch shut-off valve. Now, you can see this valve has been leaking around the packing nut over the years. So that needs to get changed out. Then we continue with 3/4 inch copper. We're coming up into a union and then transferring to the faucet. And again, you can see that some of these fittings have leaked through the years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of this. And what I'm talking about, I'm going to switch with a 3/4 inch adapter shark bite valve here, and then put in some new chrome shutoff valves and new supply lines. So that's what we're going to change things out to. But you can also see I've got one more problem. See this drip of solder? So I got to get that drip of solder off of there as well. Now, I'm going to cut this off right about probably here. So this part of the valve and the solder is not really going to be an issue. But I'm going to have to heat this up enough to get rid of this drip. Okay, so we are underneath of the sink and we're going to tackle that little piece of solder. So we have our MAP gas, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat that up, and then I'm going to take this rag and wipe the solder off. Okay, and now we're clean in order to be able to make that cut. So at this point, we're now ready to cut this off. Now, they make little tubing cutters, which basically is just like the end of this piece right here. And then naturally they make big tubing cutters, which is a handle probably about this long. But you can see that in this case scenario, our problem is we don't have a lot of room to get in a big cutter. So your options would be to buy one of these small cutters, which will work. But this is a device that I buy from Home Depot, and basically it's a small cutter, but this is a ratcheting device. So this tightens down on the copper, same as normal, and you just need to line it up with this opening to slip it onto the copper, and then you tighten it up, and you can see that this ratchets. So I can be out here in front and continue to make this cut, and naturally this is giving me the leverage to make the cut very easy. With the old plumbing out of the way, naturally we've got our pieces here. There may be some solder still left on there a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clean that up. Now this is just a little wire brush hickey thinger you buy, and this just slips right over the pipe, and we'll wiggle it back and forth, and it'll clean that copper right up. So we're going to do that. I'm also going to take the time and change these escutcheons while everything's off. Now, if you have 1/2 inch copper, your next step is pretty easy. You just grab a shark bite chrome shutoff valve and simply pop it right on your copper. Now, one thing that I always do is I take a Sharpie marker and I mark down 1 inch on the pipe. So when I shove this down in, I know that I'm going down far enough. In our case, we've got 3/4 copper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a reducer. And I looked in my shark bite fittings, and unfortunately I did not have any of these left, so I had to make a run out. And it's one thing about plumbing, you always end up making runs to the lumberyard. Anyways, this is going to reduce me from 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch. So I'll put those on first, and then I'll take and put a piece of PEX in. Then I could pop on a shark bite valve. I could also use a PEX. Now what's PEX? PEX basically use a crimp. So you have a crimping tool, and you have these little brass rings. Put that around the pipe and crimp it down into place. The shark bites have made the world so easy, it seems like, that I hardly ever get out my MAP gas anymore. Just so much more simpler. A 4-year-old can do this. So we're going to go 3/4 on the pipe, then we're going to reduce down to 1/2 inch, and then we could just put a normal valve in. But I picked this up. I thought, man, how neat. They are now making a shutoff valve, shark bite, with the supply line already attached to it. So we'll be able to do that in one piece. So push, push, push. 5 minutes later, everything's connected. We don't have no solder drips, nothing. As I mentioned, a 4-year-old could do this. Those of you that did stick around for the worst case scenario, you got a good idea of what's going to be involved if you need to change everything down there. So it's a good part of the video as well. And if you did stick around for this part of the video, I want to say thank you for watching. And please like and subscribe, and have a great day.